Welcome to Connected. I'm your host, Haley Trimboli, and whether you're PhD curious or you're navigating your program or maybe wondering what your fellow graduates are up to, this podcast is your go-to for inspiring stories, actionable insights, and meaningful connections within the PhD community. Today on Connected, we're joined by someone who has truly been pushing boundaries in healthcare innovation. Dr. Dan Weberg is a nurse, an educator, an author, and an expert in human-centered patient design. He was the first ever PhD graduate in healthcare innovation from Arizona State University and has gone on to help modernize healthcare systems at some of the most impactful organizations in the United States. Dan has served as VP of Transformation Services at Ascension. He's led clinical innovation at Trusted Health and held multiple leadership roles at Kaiser Permanente, where he is currently the National Executive Director of Nursing Workforce Development and Innovation. He's also part of the founding faculty at the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine and continues to teach at the Ohio State University. His work spans from the emergency department to the boardroom, from academic journals to startups, and always at the intersection of healthcare, leadership, and innovation. So welcome to the podcast, Dan. Where does this podcast find you today?
Yeah, happy to be here. I am in, well, it used to be sunny California. Now it's a little cloudy today, but Northern California in the Bay Area.
Yes, we're facing the same thing down here in Southern California. Unfortunately, it was like 85 yesterday and now it's cloudy. So
yep, exactly. And a week of rain coming ahead.
Yes. I'm kind of ready for it. So, all right, well, let's just jump right in. What drew you to nursing in the first place and how did that evolve into and intersect into innovation?
Yeah. My journey is sort of non-traditional, but I was a undergraduate student at Arizona State University. I had declared my freshman major as business and I started going through the business majors. I really had no idea what I wanted to do, but that sounded like a good thing. And sat in my macroeconomics class in my freshman first semester and realized I hated every ounce of the content that was being taught and resonated with it in zero ways. And so spring break came along or Christmas break, I can't remember now, but it was one of the breaks. And I was like, I got to figure out something else. And while my friends went off either to home or to Mexico for their break, I sat in my dorm room and looked through all the majors and said, what did I really like in high school? And what am I trying to do here? And I really enjoyed the sciences, especially anatomy and biology classes. And so I was like, well, that sounds good. I'll go become a physician. And I entered the pre-med sort of world and started going through the pre-med classes. Again, it wasn't really resonating with me again. It's super science heavy. And I wanted to do more like patient care stuff. I started volunteering at hospitals in the emergency department and some migrant health work stuff and just really resonated with working with patients. And so as I went through that pre-med journey, my advisors were saying, hey, not everyone gets into med school. You got to have a backup. I was like, well, I don't know. What does that even mean? What is a backup? Like, I don't want to go in biology and be a teacher. And I was like, oh, nursing sounds good. I have no idea what they do, but that's in healthcare and I'll just sort of do that. And as I continued through some of my undergrad coursework, just really started not enjoying the sort of gunner mentality that it takes to do med school at the time and started focusing more on the pre-nursing courses and got into nursing school by the skin of my teeth. Probably wouldn't even get in now with the grade point average it requires to get into nursing school at this point. But I skated in and just fell in love with the profession. And from there, sort of, it's been one of the best decisions I've made in my life and spent a lot of time growing my educational career and my work career related to it.
Yeah. Did you have any nurses in your family or anything to kind of lean on or look to as nothing. Guidance?
I mean, my mom's a medical assistant, and so that was about as close as I could get. And he had lots of, broken arms and things as a kid. And so, that was my interaction with it. But really, no one else in my immediate family is in healthcare. And so it was sort of this blind leap. And, when I was telling everybody as I got into nursing school, I actually went home in the summers and worked at like a lumber yard in Grass Valley, California, sort of this rural mountain town. And my friends are like, what the hell are you doing going into nursing? Like, I got all the stereotypes related to that. And so I had to kind of fight through that. But, the profession's been nothing but amazing for me. And so it ended up being a good choice. But it's really hard as, an 18, 19, 20-year-old trying to convince your friends that nursing was the path you wanted to go forward.
Yeah. And so then you got your master's at Arizona State University as well, and then your PhD. So how did you know like this PhD was the right next step for you at the time, and why did you choose the specific program that you chose?
Yeah. Again, like I didn't have a plan for any of this stuff. Like I don't, I just sort of went with like what was going on and what was a great opportunity. So, I graduated nursing school and I went directly into the emergency department, which was exactly where I wanted to be. I love every single aspect of the emergency department nursing. And so I did that for about a year. And in my undergraduate program, I was, as a student, I got sucked into, actually, I got the opportunity to work on patient mannequins. So those mannequins that mimic patient behavior and we use to train clinicians all over healthcare now. I taught myself how to program those as my senior project in undergrad. And so after a year of working at UCLA Medical Center as a new graduate, Arizona State called me back and said, hey, like we're building out a sim center. You should come help us. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. All right. And so they wrote a job for me to come like help them build the simulation center part-time. And I worked full-time nights in the emergency department as I was doing that. And got really into the simulation world. And Arizona State at the time was creating a master's degree in healthcare innovation. It was first of its kind in the country. And I had no idea what it was all about. But a lot of my mentors and faculty were like, hey, you should apply for this program, Dan. It's right up your alley, like simulation. Go build a simulator. This is great because that was sort of the cutting edge technology. Yeah. And so I said, sure, I'll go join the master's program. I got in and first day in class, we have one of my mentors now and good friends, Tim Porter Grady, who's this sort of iconic nursing leader. He comes in, he's like, this is a leadership degree and here's all about complex systems and research and all this kind of evidence around leadership development. I was like, oh, I'm not going to build a simulator, but I love what he's saying. So I got really into the content and finished that program in the first cohort to graduate with it. And right before our graduation, we had this student meeting and the faculty said, hey, we're creating a PhD in innovation and we need people to apply. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. I have no idea what that means, but I'm going to go do that. That sounds really good. And I'm teaching I'm working at ASU part-time. I'm going to have my tuition for free. So I was like, I got to jump on this thing. And I interviewed with, I think, 2 or 3 of my other colleagues. And I was the only one that got into the PhD program. And so there I was like having no clue what was going on. But jumped in and just so enjoyed just the deep thought of the PhD program and how deep you could go into the content and the research and the theoretical backings of why people do things, in my case, in how change occurs in organizations and leadership and that kind of stuff. So that was sort of my journey. And it sounds like, I was all loosey-goosey, but it was really just sort of thinking about how can I advance my knowledge in something I'm super interested in and take advantage of sort of the situation I was in at the time.
Yeah. It just like landed right in front of you. So same question as before, like, did you have anybody in like your family network that had completed a PhD? Like, did you sort of kind of know like, all right, like I have folks who have gone through this, what it entails, or truly like this is a new journey?
So my aunt has a PhD in chemistry, but she sort of, and she was in like the cosmetic industry and was at the time sort of building out some cosmetic different products and things. And then she got burnt out on that and ended up going and working in construction after that with my uncle who owned his own remodeling business. And so like she wasn't a great role model from a PhD standpoint. Like, hey, Dan, this is how hard it is. And like, I'm not doing it anymore. But I talked to her about it and she would talk about how rigorous it was and like, sort of the mantra of the PhD and that kind of stuff. And so I really didn't have any mentors other than my faculty who are encouraging me to do it and say, hey, Dan, this is something that you can really sink your teeth into. We think you'd be great for it. But I wasn't surrounded by academics that I was like, I want to be like them.
Yeah. I always find that interesting to kind of know like if folks have had that experience before going in, because there's a lot that you learn along the way if you haven't really been exposed to it. And so being in a brand new program wasn't anything new for you. Like you had done that with your master's, but did you have any like hesitancy about joining a brand new PhD program? Like, is there anything about that experience that stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, so it was sort of new and not new. Like the PhD in nursing it was a PhD in nursing, but there was sort of a minor in innovation or a specialization in innovation. So the PhD program was very rigorous and it had great history and some amazing faculty and that kind of stuff and all the research and grants and all that kind of stuff that sort of surrounded it. But this foray into leadership and innovation was sort of a challenge because, and even in nursing, nursing sort of has its dogmas and its theorists and it's sort of, this whole sort of culture around it. And when my faculty mentors who created the program came in and said, hey, we're going to do a leadership degree, they were told things like, leadership's not a science. There's no evidence behind leadership. You can't research it. Like, don't you just lead? Like, why would we do any of that? And that was on leadership, which has an established body of science. And then on top of that, they're like, and we're going to talk about innovation. They're like, well, what the hell is that? Like, this is all just magic foo-foo, like unicorn poo or something. And so, there's a lot of stuff they had to fight. And I was sort of like the poster child to like be in the middle of those type of conversations and then also have to defend my theoretical frameworks and my research and my dissertation and all that kind of stuff, which I actually really liked. I mean, I'm sort of that chief provocateur sort of persona. Like, I'm okay with the conflict and pushing things forward. And I love challenging the status quo. And so together it was a good mix, but we did have a lot of challenges. And especially like when I got to my defense and that kind of stuff, I really, I didn't choose the traditional leadership theories and stuff. And so I really had to do extra work to defend these things and educate some of the people on my committee who were content experts in nursing to get them over the hump and allow me to sort of move forward in the program.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So like speaking of the PhD program, dissertation, et cetera, like what were some of the, like you mentioned already, a few of the challenges that you had to face in a new program, but as far as like the PhD program itself, like what were some of the challenges that you had to navigate, whether, writing, the research, the reading, et cetera?
All of it. Yeah. I'm an ER nurse, so like, sure, I know about a lot of things and sort of an expert of none of them. That's sort of the ER mantra. And so I had to really flip that. And, the PhD is to make you an expert in that one thing that you do your research on. And so I had to sort of flip that. But for me, a lot of it was just changing my thinking. The master's program changed a little bit. And one of my mentors, puts it pretty great. He's like, bachelor's is just get to know what the heck the thing is. A master's is to apply theory to practice, and then a PhD is to create new knowledge in that body of work. And so, I had to flip my mindset from applying and doing to, getting into that theoretical thinking. And my first semester, I just remember the amount of reading that I had to do just to like show up to class and be competent. That was a huge like shift for me. And so I didn't realize how much thinking and like processing you have to do just to sort of show up to the Tuesday class and have a coherent conversation, because there's no tests or anything in at least in my PhD program. It's all about debate and making your case and all that kind of stuff. And so I just had to flip my mindset. And once I got the hang of it after that first semester, I sort of enjoyed it and got into it. But it was a really big shift for me to start like thinking in that way.
Yeah, it's a heavy load, a lot of theory, a lot to digest and start to make sense of. Did you have what was the model structure for your PhD program? Was it a cohort model where you had a group of students who were moving through together, or more of a solo journey?
Yeah, it was a cohort. We were sort of on different time frames. I was able to find some, again, sort of the rebel. I found a way to do the program part-time while my colleagues were doing it full-time. And so I would only take 2 classes a semester, except I went through the summer and they didn't. So it really only ended up a semester behind them at the end of the 4 or 5 years. But I was with a cohort of I think about 6 or 7. All the other ones were not innovation focused. They were traditional nursing focused. They had their faculty mentor and they were just basically sort of copying their research or building on their research and stuff. And I was out there just sort of doing all this new stuff. But we bonded really quickly. And I was also the only male in my group too. So that sort of led itself to some interesting conversations, especially in qualitative research class and stuff, where my perspective was different and sometimes not even valued.
Yeah. Wow. That dynamic is always very interesting because that's like a huge staple to your journey is the ones that you're doing it with. And because that's like what the conversation can be centered around and everyone's experiences. So interesting. And so dissertation, I know you mentioned it, can you speak a little bit to sort of what the dissertation journey was like for you? Like, how did you locate the topic that you located? Like, how did you sort of navigate finding chairs, committee members, etc.?
Yeah, that was also a journey for me. I remember a particular Facebook post that I posted in the middle of it that got me in trouble. But for me, really sort of, it was a little bit of a struggle. I knew I wanted to connect innovation, leadership, and something else together to kind of create a framework that I would look at how like novel solutions or creating the culture of allowing for innovation and novelty to occur in systems. So I quickly sort of honed in on a leadership theory, which was complexity leadership theory. I knew that one. And then innovation, I sort of did a hybrid between diffusion of innovation theory and then complex systems theory. And so those were easy. And then there's like this third leg of the stool that I couldn't figure out. And then so ultimately I ended up using some culture research. And so once I had the framework, then it was like, okay, now how do I figure out like what's the medium in which to uncover like what I want to uncover or ask the questions here. So I started with simulation. I was like, well, I could build a simulation. We could bring leaders through it. I could figure out if you do these things, does it make them more innovative and use some scale? And I went through a ton of iterations. I mean, I have notes and papers and of like ideas that I'd work on with my advisor on. And ultimately what we came down to, we sort of went back to those simulation roots, those mannequin simulation roots. And because that was an emerging technology in nursing education at the time, we could use the adoption of the mannequin-based training as sort of the proxy for innovation because it was a new way to teach. And so I ended up looking at how a school of nursing adopted simulation as the innovation into their and looked at all the leadership sort of behaviors around that, used a qualitative case study model to do it, and came up with like 8 behaviors of innovation with that. So it all sort of like it went sort of full circle for me. And from a committee standpoint, it was fairly easy. I had a great advisor, Dr. Kathy Malik, who had run and built the innovation master's program, so we knew each other really well. And then I had another really iconic nurse leader, Tim Poor Grady. So those were easy, but they weren't looked upon by the school as like super academic. And so the PhD chair of the program was like, well, Dan, you need to have like a traditional academic on your program. These two don't, they're not funded researchers and that kind of stuff. So I ended up having to put on one of my other committee members, Dr. Fleury, who is a more traditional sort of nursing theory focused researcher, and then Dr. Deb Hagler, who really was a content expert for me around teaching and education. And so that ended up rounding out my committee. And for the most part, it went pretty well, although there was still a rub between like the innovation and the traditional academics that sort of continued to move forward. But it actually helped me grow and make the case better over time.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds interesting. So can you speak to like your final defense? Like, can you live that moment again? Like, what was that like? I actually haven't really talked about that moment a lot on this podcast because it's so stressful sometimes to relive, right?
I thought my comps were a little bit more stressful than the defense.
Okay.
Like, the way the defense was framed to me by my committee chair, Dr. Malik, was like, Dan, once you get to the defense, like we've basically said you're good. Like if you fail your defense, that's on us, not on you. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. But like the comps, that was a little bit harder. So the oral defense of my project and stuff. So that one was a little tense. So that's where we had to like, they're asking all these questions. Well, why'd you choose that theory and not this one? I'm like, wait, which one? And like trying to remember all this stuff in real time. So that was a little bit more stressful, but the defense went really well. I had about, 30 people in the room, just went through my project and got a round of applause at the end, and we were sort of done with it. But leading up to that, there was some timing issues. So I thought I had done all my analysis. I had rewritten chapter 4 like 37 times. I have 80 different iterations of this freaking defense and dissertation. And I'm like, I'm so done with this thing. So I emailed my committee and I was like, hey, I think we're there. Like I've rewritten this thing so many times. We've basically come back to the original writing. Like, I'm ready for defense. If I get it in the next 4 days, I can meet this graduation date and we can be done. And I got an email back that said, hey, Dan, we'll tell you when you're done.
All right.
And I was like, okay, got it now. And it was funny that was like a month before the deadline. And then, like 3 weeks before the deadline, I get this email after another couple iterations and they're like, okay, submit all your stuff. We're good. And I was like, wait a minute. Now I have 3 weeks to like format all this stuff and like get it into the university and do all the things. And we ended up pulling it off. But it was just, I don't know. I tell people like, it's a rite of passage in many ways. And so there's times where you get humbled just because you need to be humbled to like join this club of like elite thought leaders.
Yeah.
And I learned that the hard way.
Yeah. I don't know if there's an easy way. I mean,
No,
maybe
I don't
there
think so
is.
either.
Yeah, there could be, but yeah, it's typically a hard way. Yeah. So you were part-time in the program, and were you working? You were teaching? Like, what else were you doing during
Yeah,
that
I
time?
was working 2 jobs and going through the program. And so yeah, I was an ER nurse at night full time. I worked part time in the clinical simulation lab, 2 days a week at ASU, and then even later in the program, I got promoted to a director level role for a little while too, and so I was navigating all of that. And when I was doing my dissertation, actually, I had moved from Arizona where I was living and working, and I moved to Ohio for a year and a half. And right when I was finishing up my dissertation, I got a job at Kaiser Permanente in California. So I was moving back to California, where I'm from. I was training for an Ironman, and I was starting a new job as like a director at Kaiser Permanente. So I was like, well, I guess 3 things is good. I can do 3 things. No kids
Why
or anything
not?
yet. My wife was super supportive, and really the reason I succeeded in the PhD program. But I'm
Yeah.
sort of a glutton for punishment in that way.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. An Ironman, new role, dissertation, like just exactly pile it on. So what are some of your like key strategies to help you juggle all this? Like what helped you be successful?
Yeah, I think for me that it's sort of like this. I've sort of built my career around like threes, and so I usually have a foot in practice, and so or operations or industry, I guess. I have a foot in academia, so I part time teach or at least guest lecture, if not part time teach. And then there's always something in either family or my own goal, whether that's that a triathlon or some other thing that I'm focused on. And then when things get rough, for me, I can focus my energy on one of those 3 things and not have all my eggs in one basket. So that's sort of how I manage things. And, when work is hard, I can focus on, the academic side or for the personal side or vice versa. So that's sort of how I balance it. But, for me, I've like self-diagnosed ADHD. So if I don't have 3 things going all the time, then I get bored and then I get in trouble. So then I start causing problems. My wife's like, Dan, you need another hobby.
Right. Yeah. She's like, wait a minute.
Get
Yeah.
out
We
of
got to
here.
balance this out. Yeah.
Right.
No doubt. Wow. No, that's cool. I mean, you see it as a benefit of having all these different things because they probably help inform the other as well and just helping you balance. So you've worked across and you are sort of working across, as you mentioned, like academic, industry, I mean, startup spaces as well. Like once you graduated, how has your PhD informed some of the career choices or like the influence and impact that you're aiming to make?
Yeah, I mean, I never wanted to do the traditional sort of academic route for after a PhD. Like, I'm not. You don't want me running your research program. For me, it was really around the content. I just fell in love with the deep dive into the theoretical frameworks, content, and research around leadership and innovation. Yeah. So that's really why I did the program and what I really focused on getting out of the program. But for me, once you finish that PhD, like people's perspective of you completely changes, and you have like this automatic sort of clout that's yours to lose. And so I found people turning to me to ask me questions that they've never asked before. Like Dan the ER nurse versus Dan the PhD was like very different conversations. And there's a responsibility to that, I think, too. And so it helped me grow as a person and as a leader. And I just opened so many doors. I mean, so many doors. I probably wouldn't have got my role at Ohio State in that without at least being in the program. My job at Kaiser definitely would have not got it unless the PhD was there, because the way they wanted those roles to be was this deep inquiry and challenging the status quo with research and evidence. And that's what the PhD prepares you to do. And so it's really catalyzed a lot. And then, I've done a couple research studies in collaboration with people over the time, but my goal is really to be an expert in innovation and leadership and not necessarily sort of conduct a program of research.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not easy to balance those worlds either. But I am curious. So you you completed the dissertation, your final defense, you're in California. Was there any huge change that happened like right after, or you were like, okay, I'm going back to my job, like I just defended and here we are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it was sort of like anticlimactic. Yeah, my job sort of didn't care. That I was working as a director of nursing innovation, but I was on the IT side, so like none of my peers had PhDs or they had all MBAs and like tech degrees and stuff. So they're like, whatever, Dan, we don't, what are you talking about PhD? We don't care. But my nursing sort of crew that I worked with very closely, was really excited about it, and they know that sort of rigor and that kind of stuff. So that they welcomed me into it. But the operations folks are like, whatever, like you're still just Dan. Who cares what you do? So it was the same after the Ironman too. I come back, I'm like, man, I just completed 140 40 miles, and they're like, whatever. Like, come on, give me like one day.
Give me a little credit.
But I ended up sort of building this brand over time. Though, is Dr. Nurse Dan is my brand, my website and stuff. And so now all the time at work, they're like, hey, Dr. Dan, come on in, or Dr. Nurse Dan, or whatever. So now it's sort of become like a persona, which I appreciate. I don't really care about that title that much, but I sort of enjoy this, having that persona, and it's just fun to have that.
Yeah, definitely. You're like, if you're not going to call me it, I'm going to put it in my name. And
right.
That way it's going to come up in every conversation.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also work in industry, and I think that it can be challenging when you're in industry to stay in academia, especially to like think about publishing and doing like rigorous research. But like that is such a staple of the PhD. It's like you really learn how to contribute to theory. So, how do you give energy to that while still maintaining so much else? Like, how much energy can you give to that, etc.?
Yeah, for me, what I think it gives you is a different worldview. And I don't think you get this in any other program but a PhD program. It changes how you can think about problems and how you can view the world, because you now have a multiple theories to sort of make sense of things that you used to just sort of be like, oh, I guess that's just how it is. And now you're like, oh no, that's, Edgar Schein said that's how organizational culture is. Oh, I can see where he sort of got that. And well, one of his pieces of advice was to do this thing to change that thing. And I go try that. So, I was like tinkering with things, and I'd sit in meetings, I'd take notes, and I'm like drawing these mind maps of like complex systems and like influencers and non-influencers, like doing all this stuff. And I'm taking notes. And then I love the practicality of just sort of taking this theoretical mindset and trying to figure out how to make sense of the world around me, and then try and use these tools I learned to like manipulate it in a good way and not in a bad way, but like sort of manipulate the different things. Or, oh, okay, I know this thing, I'll do that, and then see if that works. Oh, that didn't work. Let me go do this other theory. And so I was just playing around with stuff, and that's how I kind of keep myself interesting. And now, as I've sort of evolved my practice and my work and my leadership, it's, now I can explain that to others. And so now I try and make sense of the complex things that are happening in healthcare and sort of frame it through storytelling and these theoretical lenses to help other people make sense of what's going on and have tools in order to change it.
Yeah. I can tell you just have a genuine interest in it and to share that information. And so I'm sure that helps to drive your success in that area as well. And you teach. Can you talk a little bit about like what you teach and what that looks like for you?
Yeah. So, I always have those three things. So one of those things is having a foot in academia in some way. And so I'm part-time faculty at the Ohio State University. They trademarked the, so you gotta say it. And I helped write their master's in healthcare innovation program there, write the curriculum for it, and now teaching it. And I've been doing that now, I think 12 years at Ohio State, and before that with Arizona State. So I try and make, because I went through that program, I try and sort of take what the experience I had and try and replicate it and even improve it for my students, and try and again make theory. Because when I teach in the master's program, and so when I talk to master's students about theory, their eyes just roll.
Yeah,
and they're like, oh God, here we're gonna go talk about Florence Nightingale or whatever, these kind of things. And I'm like, no, like think of it as like a lens to view the world, and having a tool belt with all these tools now that you have to change the things you want to change, instead of just being like, I'm frustrated with those people and I don't know why they act that way. Now you can like explain it, and then you can go change it. And like, oh yeah, okay, it'll make sense of that. So I really enjoy it. I teach one class a semester online, and it's been really fun to just stay connected to that. And it keeps me grounded too, because I see the next generation of our leaders coming up and kind of get a sense of what they're up to.
Yeah, I bet, because you're in the workforce, and then that's of interest to you, and you kind of get to see what students are thinking and what's important to them, and be able to kind of take that into the work. So and what's next for you? So you're already doing a lot, but are there any like new research projects or areas that you're excited about looking for that you could share?
Yeah, we're working on a couple of things. One's at Kaiser. We're working on a study. We call it Inarnia. I don't remember what it all stands for. It's an acronym. We love our acronyms, but it's around looking at new grad nurses' competence and confidence as they go through a transition to practice program for their first year. So really trying to look at that transition from student to practicing licensed nurse. And so that'll be really great. I think it's one of the first multi-site studies related to that. And so that's going to be really exciting. We're working on that now. And then I'm actually working with a group out of Israel, Israeli nurses, to look at social media content from nurses and the themes and sort of tone and messages that are coming out of social media from nurses too, to see sort of what's going on with our profession and sort of parse that out. So we're just starting. We just got IRB approval, so we'll just be starting that work pretty soon too. So those will be two interesting things that sort of give us a lens on, the new nurses coming into practice, and then, what's the tone of nursing across the world from a social media standpoint.
Wow, so interesting. Do you still just focus on like qualitative work like that you had in your dissertation, or have you sort of broadened that? Are you doing quantitative mixed methods?
Yeah, you do not want me to do quantitative anything.
Okay.
ANOVA was like the bane of my existence. If Google didn't exist, I would never have passed ANOVA. Yeah. I just don't have that statistical mindset. It is not. I can't figure beyond p-values and stuff. Like, you don't want to ask me anything around quantitative things. So, that's not my skill set. But really, I come in as sort of the innovation theory and leadership theory expert, which I really enjoy. And then qualitative research and sort of that storytelling and sort of making sense of cases and that kind of stuff is really where my expertise comes in. So I let the biostats people do that. Yeah. And I'm going to tell them the story after we get the data.
Yeah, which is so important. It's so important. So yeah, you got to know your strengths. And I always felt like I had to know it all, because you have to take those classes. I mean, you do take your quant if you like qual, you do take qual if you like quant, and it's like, well, you got to know it. But yeah, I mean, you kind of lean in a direction, I'm sure. So yeah. All right. Well, a couple signature questions that I ask each guest, and I'm hoping to ask you as well here. The first one is, what's one book or a podcast or an article that you think every PhD should read or listen to?
Oh, man. That's a great question. I have my bookcase right here. I'm trying to think of what, from a nursing perspective, I think there's one called Quantum Leadership that I would highly recommend if you're in healthcare or healthcare leadership. That one is great. It's all about complex systems. So I would say that's a perfect book. But from just a general, like, should you do your PhD or not? I mean, this podcast is probably the most helpful thing. I think you just got to follow people in that industry and see what they're doing. I mean, I tell people who are making the choice to go get their doctorate, like, what do you want to do with it? And if it's just to check a box, it is way too painful to check a box. You will cry multiple times during your doctoral program. Do not do it to just check the box. It will not add value. But if you have sort of a mission to change something, then you should do that. So. Yeah.
And if you check a box, I'm not sure you get through. I mean,
no, I don't think so either. Oof. The faculty see through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, that, and I mean, the hard moments, like, you got to have that like thing that takes you.
The grit.
Yes. All right. And then if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice before starting your PhD, what would it be?
To figure out what the heck you were doing. I mean, I really like I don't know. I mean, I think just like getting more information about what the PhD was and like the process of it, and just getting in tune with like the whole, soup to nuts. What is the course? What's the dissertation? What's defense? Like, I just had no clue. And so I was learning it as I was experiencing it. So I think that would be a piece. But I would also tell myself to do it the way I did it, which was get it done. Like, I had a gap between my bachelor's and my master's, and then I went all the way through. I just powered through master's and PhD. And if I had a choice now, I would not go back to school now. And so I think just getting it done early was really important for me, just knowing my sort of attention span. And so I think I would tell myself, you did a good job. Like, go get this done now, and then you have the rest of your career not to go back to school. So.
Yeah, just keep going. Why not? Yeah. And I like your point of like, understand as much as you can about the PhD. Like, ask people, like, don't be afraid, because I do think some of it's a little bit hidden, and probably for like good reason. So you're not overwhelmed, but I also think like it's helpful to really understand what you're getting into.
I think the other piece is also, I tell my mentees and stuff, like, your advisor makes or breaks the program too. So, it's great that you want to go to the Yale or Harvard PhD program, but if you don't have someone over there that knows your content, resonates with where you want to go with it, then you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, or just copying or facilitating their research rather than doing what's going to make you grow. And so really finding that connection between between the culture of the program, the content expertise of a specific advisor, and what you want to achieve is the magic sauce that I don't think a lot of people think about.
Yeah, totally. Would you on dissertation committees yourself or anything
I am.
nowadays?
Yeah. I'm on 2 of them right now.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
try to make it easy on them. I'm like, oh, this is a really traumatic moment for you. So I'm going to like deliver this like in a nice way, but also like you gotta fix it.
Yeah. Committee members, I feel like you kind of get a little that area to do that. So do you encourage your master's students to pursue their PhDs, or sort of like it depends?
Yeah, it sort of depends. A lot of them just want to sort of stay in that level of leadership and don't really have a desire to kind of go deep. The thing about nursing is we have 2 doctoral degrees, right? So we have the PhD and then we have the DNP, the Doctor of Nursing Practice, which is much more sort of a practice ready sort of evidence translation versus generating research piece. And so, I really talked to a lot of them about that choice. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated. A lot of my master's students want to stay in operations and practice and stuff. And so the DNP sort of makes more sense for them. But there are definitely a few that are sort of really geek out on the content or really want to sort of do some novel research and stuff. And I'll push them that way as well.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. I think it's probably such a blessing that they have you there to help guide them and think about those decisions. So thank you so much for joining today. I just really appreciate your journey and sharing your experience. And it's really amazing the work that you're doing and balancing it all, academia and practice. And so I think this will be really interesting and insightful for folks who might not take the traditional academic route or not sure if you can balance both. And I think you're doing it really quite well. So it's really interesting to hear this. So if people want to like connect with you, follow your work, where's the best place to do that?
Well, I found out I'm officially a LinkedIn influencer, and so I'm on LinkedIn a lot.
Cool.
Which is where I met Savannah and things too. So, but yeah, LinkedIn is really great, and then you can always go to my website, drnursedan.com, drnursedan.com, and lots of resources there and a way to contact me that way too.
Yeah, so many good things on there, lots of your publications and other fantastic resources. So again, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. What a great conversation with Dr. Dan. My sister is a nurse by background, and she actually connected us together. And so I was really excited to have somebody from the healthcare world who I haven't had on yet to talk a little bit about their experience and what they're doing now. And I told my sister, I want to be Dr. Dan when I grow up. So I think he is truly doing everything and really paints a really interesting picture on what you can do with a PhD. You aren't really tied to one area or another. And I think sometimes that can feel like the expectation is you're either in academia or you're in industry. So I think the work that he's done, if you check out his website or follow him on LinkedIn, you can really see the impact he's able to make by utilizing his PhD. I mean, he's teaching, interacting with students, seeing what's top of mind, but also in industry and doing a lot of great work for organizations like Kaiser and others. So great conversation. What resonated with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop me a message or a comment. And thank you for tuning in to Connected today. You can find all of the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your PhD community. And be sure to follow along on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for more conversations just like this. So I hope to see you next time, and let's stay connected.